I'm going to review some of the responses to the last video about Vaush, and go over some of the stuff that was cut from the original. I didn't think I'd have to go over this, but just to clarify 2 main points, you can't really be racist towards whites. That's not really a thing, at least here in the West. Racism as it stands is really about power. This is precisely the reason why when Ian says that there might be systemic differences, but even if you take all that away, the end result is still the same. It's not the same.
Now, I know the difference there. It's that trans people are systemically oppressed and white people really aren't. But even if you take away the systemic oppression element, you still have the exclusionary.
Can't take away the systemic oppression element.
I mean, if my grandmother had wheels, she would have been a bike. You know what? You know, what? It doesn't make any sense. What
different things are different. Different things are different.
I can have people yelling racist chants towards me. You Yorkie. You honky piece of shit. You Peckerwood Oakie trash hole. You lime nose porridge eating Anglo. You whitey white cracker mouth white. Okay, look, I'm still going to be more favourably viewed on job descriptions. I've still got a country that teaches my history in schools. I'm still far less likely to go to prison or be stopped and searched, aren't I? That's the reality of oppression. Secondly, nation isn't just a synonym for country. In the way that people like Marx used it, the historical way, the historical definition of the word, nation refers to a people in an area with a shared identity, culture, heritage, language, etc. So, Basque Nation, Navajo Nation, these are specific people groups. I think the crux of all this is, and the thing that I'm really trying to get at, is that a lot of the time folks can feel as though they're really doing good. They're really adamant that they're doing good for people, when in reality, they're actually being very inconsiderate and naive without noticing. As an example from my life, I was once talking to my self-proclaimed centrist friend about feminism, and by the end of it, he said something along the lines of, you know what, you're right, and I guess it's up to us as men to give women a helping hand. Now, at the time I went along with that, but the more I've really thought about it, it's actually very reductive. I know that over the past few years we've all tried to sort of combat toxic maleness by saying, this isn't feminism, this is feminism, but I think we've reached a point now where we have to actually start saying, yeah, it's a little bit more complicated than just that. And when you're saying, lending a helping hand, what you're actually saying, it's coming from the presumed subtext that you are the one who's going to be doing all the heavy lifting. That you intend to take charge, as it were. If you ask me, with the history of feminism and all that, the actual way I personally think about helping is largely one of stepping out of the way. You might think that's regressive, that's segregational, it's splitting the working class apart, but women are at a lesser point in society, and you have to, allow more space by removing some of yours. Otherwise, it's very akin to the white man must liberate the slaves. The enslaver must free the enslaved. It's just coming from this man's burden trope. It's not actually helping. That's called wanting to be a martyr. And at first, of course, it's very annoying. You've been told your entire life in the media that it's your job as a dude to change the world. And now, even though you've become left and you're like, yeah, I know it all now, I'm a feminist, blah, 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 only to be told, well, no, I think you got a bit more work to do. Of course it's frustrating. It's always frustrating being wrong. But that doesn't mean that your annoyance is valid. Chris Hedges actually spoke about that. I don't really care what you think about Chris Hedges. It's the point that matters. He called this accepting the blindness. And when you do that, when you accept that blindness, you can then actually go on to help people in a genuine, real manner that actually makes proper change. On this same point, I'm all for internationalism. Let me make that clear, but you can't just get to internationalism by just proclaiming it, right? Because it's very much, we should work towards internationalism, and I'll be the one at the front. Okay, that's how it comes across. Oh, how could I possibly be supporting chauvinism if I oppose chauvinism? Huh? That makes me the goodest boy. It's much harder for someone who is higher up the pecking order to really empathize with those who are lower. Those who are being pecked to know what it feels like on a daily basis. People who are more privileged don't have that constant feedback loop, and we engage in unnoticed aggressions and beliefs of grandeur. It's the world's biggest gambit. Again, you might not think you're saying that, but that's how it comes across. That's the text. That's the end result of this. Actual problem solving requires letting go of your ego, letting go of your fire hose, so to speak, and letting someone else have a go. And just an added point, that friend that I told you about, it would appear, based on what I told you, that he'd come around, right? He hadn't. He just said that to give off the impression of change. In reality, further on, a few days more later in life, he would say stuff like, oh, women are crazy, aren't they? You know, he just continued his very misogynistic, passive-aggressive jabs whenever a woman dared to have an opinion. It's one of the reasons why I don't trust Ian whenever he claims, you know, to have learnt these things, because he gives off that same exact narcissistic energy that friend had, just learning how to hide it a bit better for next time. The topic of South Africa is one that I left out of the original video, but it's a very interesting one. In America, people might be able to worm their way out of responsibility by saying, oh, you know, I was Irish, I'm Italian, I wasn't a WASP, whatever. But in South Africa, there's really no excuse. The land was literally trampled on by whites and enforced much harder than any Jim Crow. Somewhere around 70 to 80% of the land is held by whites, who make up literally less than 10% of the population. They still maintain the power over that land. So if I went up and said, well, not me, but if someone went up and said, we are poor because you have all the power over the land, the white man would really not have any excuse. No, I only have it because my father had it. I shouldn't be held responsible, Inspector Ghoul. Well, why does he have it? Okay, this is in literal living memory. This isn't something that happened 150 years ago. It's literally less than 30 years ago. How else can it be? It was enforced through racism. So in order for that wrong to be undone, it has to be decolonized. That requires taking the land, giving the power and autonomy back to black people. Otherwise, in this, communistic South African utopia, there will be enormous oversight by white people who've experienced decades of top pecking order privilege. What do I really mean when I say oversight? Well, it might be difficult for you to understand if you don't live outside of America, but a lot of people have this highly Americanized outlook on things. It's not, necessarily that Ian supports exceptionalism or anything, but he still definitely harbors that certain integral American-centric outlook. I remember when he was so avidly defending, this vote blue no matter who, he was literally saying stuff like, stop talking about American politics when you don't even live here. You don't get to speak for issues that don't affect you. And I was like, wow. America, you are not Vietnam or Costa Rica. You are the single most powerful country for nearly 100 years. The world answers to you. The world is changed by you. You are not some little nation somewhere with a unique identity that bigger nations like to fetishize and demonize. You are the identity of the world. So when you scold people for talking about American issues even though they live outside, this is the kind of centric thinking I'm talking about. You're literally number one, and yet you act like you're just any other country. Now think about, that's the Americanized part of your identity. Now think about how the white part of your identity might overlook the experiences of BME people. And of course, yes, before anyone says anything, there are some people who go too far with this and just make another dogma out of it. Festering their opinion in America, not based on its history, but just on the fact that it is America, and end up just hating or liking something based on America's stance. And that's just a really flawed outlook. You are not going to just use that as a cover to ignore the true reality of American chauvinism. That is very much a current in leftist circles as well. Just in case anyone's, wondering, I think the same for Britain as well. Okay, we like to hide ourselves by saying, oh, America's worse and all that, but the reality is, we're pretty much just as bad. We're just, runner-up. Just on a similar topic, yeah, Welsh independence, go for it. All right, if that's what you want, if that's what you people want, go for it. The old thing about, the Welsh-English union is that, yes, it is a union that has only been for the benefit of one. Very on topic, eh? I don't really know too much about the Cornish. I would have figured as far as homogeneity went, they're basically English at this point. But I'm happy to be proved wrong. Obviously, let me reiterate, you could have the debate about reactionary practices within your group or your movement, okay, and there are many, all right, but you first and foremost have to have that baseline that each nation has its own right to self-determination, okay? That's your starting point. Then you can go further into it. Nobody's going to cancel you for criticising aspects of Plaid Cymru or the SNP. Just stop having a crass take on that fundamental point. I noticed that some people were a little bit confused about the tribe analogy. It's explaining basically why we can say North Americans sleep on stolen land, but British people do not. In the land back discussion, some like to bring up, as Ian partly did, well, all people fought against one another in the past. American Indians fought against one another. They enslaved each other. What do we do? Do we just go back to the very first people and then give them the land? How are we going to do that? Why don't we just give reparations to the Babylonians? And that's true. It wasn't just all peaceful, it was violent. I'm very sure it was. We can't change the past, but we can change what is happening today. What are the antagonisms of today? And Indian nations still exist. They're still dispossessed. The injustice is still alive in our historical continuity. There aren't colonial antagonisms in Britain like there are in America. There's no similar dynamic. There are national questions, like I just said, and go for it. All right, but there's no real colonial dynamic. This is Britain, by the way. Those questions ended many centuries ago. That's why Indian land back is a thing, but Iceni land back is not a thing. That's why the plantation of Ulster is still a very touchy subject, but the Donnonii question is not. One thing I did do wrong in my video was I incorrectly made out that Native Americans are all of one nation. My bad, I should have said nations. Of course, I know that American Indians are all of different tribes. What this graphic is trying to showcase is, when it comes to effect, when it comes to how the dominant power views them, they're treated as Indian. Is there not a shared experience felt by all Indian nations? There cannot be an indigenous camp unless there is a colonizer. I don't say that I'm indigenous to England, do I? You see how weird that sounds? Some far-right people like to say stuff like decolonize Europe from all these, migrants and whatnot. And can you not see how this is just so obviously false compared with America? The funny thing about this is, from some of the things I've seen over the past few days, some people get the impression that I'm some kind of white knight for black people. And the general point is I'm not obsessed with it, like many folks come across as. This same obsession that I see, I can only really compare it to back when anti-feminists in the day were obsessed with this archetype of the angry misandrist. Now, when you go back and look at a lot of that stuff and all the points made by Sarkeesian and Watanabe and Watson, they're fairly tame. Because all this was just a load of pedantic nitpickery at the time. It was spurred on by greater profits and clout. There was a TikTok some time ago where some teenager was literally like, white people, just so you're aware, you enslaved my people. And there was some hard squatty guy who responded by going, "Oi, just so you know, my family's from Scandinavia. I never lived in America. I didn't enslave anyone." Then why are you so angry then? Why are you so obsessed? Are people of colour coming to kill you? Get a grip. Same thing with this no-names woke segregationism. It's not. Segregation was literally, you are nothing. You're an underclass. You're not even fully human. You're a slave with extra privileges. No-name's literally just saying, stop being Steve Buscemi. How do you do, fellow blacks? Actually sort yourself out. Work in your group. Get rid of the racism inherent to your groups. And there is a lot of racism. Believe me. This isn't a controversial opinion. It's only controversial because you've accepted a very diluted, superficial view of racism that suits your interests. Of course, a lot of us don't really want to talk about this stuff because we're scared of being ostracized. Like I've said, the stuff I've seen over the past few days, oh, you're a white knight for the black man. Oh, you'll be the most enlightened on the mass grave. Wow. Well, okay, this is coming from so-called leftists. Okay, here's the big one. Nation of Islam. What more shall I say? Sexist, homophobic, conspiratorial, opportunistic, anti-Semitic, occult? Yep, all true. All true. I denounce all of that. Okay? You can have that discussion from that standpoint. Go for it. You're probably right. And I'd agree with you. It is a problem. All these things are problems. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter what I say, does it? The worst reactionary black nationalism serves black people's self-determination. The best reactionary white nationalism serves white supremacy. Is that too difficult for people to understand? But no, of course, Nation of Islam bad. Haha, own. Next. I urge you to actually go back to that video, show me any time where I actually defended the Nation of Islam. On the same point, this one is very familiar to me. The he was bad until his final year argument. Yeah, I can't say that I'm not guilty of that one. Tell me again, really, when we go through all this, tell me again that we're not just taking on black people and black people's thought once it just becomes ever so slightly placable to white audiences. Okay, Malcolm X is one. Don't even get me started on the Black Panther Party. Anybody can say that they love the Black Panther Party these days. Anyone. It has gone from being the, vanguard of the black nation for socialism into the party of Rainbow Coalition and Free Breakfast. That's literally it. What a bastardization of such a great movement for black people. Rainbow Coalition and Free Breakfast. Walter Jr. would be proud. This is a good comment, because of course black people are not indigenous either, right? Well, within colonial discourse, I believe that they fit into the category of arrivant. That's people who are forced to come because of sanctions by that country, war by that country, being brought against their will by that country, those sort of things. So black, Latin, Iraqi, etc., arrivant. Although, there is some debate, you can look into that. But that is something that is overlooked in this common settler indigenous binary. And some people might say, oh, well, not all black people came against their will. It doesn't matter. How does African culture in America manifest itself in comparison to white culture? Why is that? Does centuries of oppression have something to do with it? I didn't think I'd have to go over this one either, but apparently so. Vaush isn't a paedophile or a defender. I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt on that, alright? Here's the thing that you're overlooking. If your argument ends up with you having to reach that far, with all the very obvious other differences involved, then maybe you should rethink your stance. And how literally leaning on this sonic meme all the time just absolves you of any further discussion. You can't really affect the distributors of what you consume, sure, but you can affect the content of what you consume, and that does make a real-world tangible difference. You can watch the rest of his discussion there, he just reaches and literally equivocates on any possible rung, not just that one, many other interviews, oh, if someone was on the pavement homeless, would you impugn yourself for not giving them money? Owned. Next. This is what happens when you're doing consistency for consistency's sake. Stop doing it. You're literally giving nothing of value. Instead that I'm not interested in debating Vaush. No, I'm not. Look, if people are interested in having discussions, I'm going to have them. I'm not just going to not bother, talking about this to anyone and say, no, case closed, I'm right, whatever. Okay, but I'm not going to waste my time with somebody who argues like this. Now, what about that James Baldwin debate, so to speak? Because I knew that I would get people saying this. Okay, I was actually tempted to put words over the top of the speech, but I just felt it would ruin the whole flow of it. If your takeaway is, oh, it's a debate, Dave said debate is stupid, ha ha, oh, he said we need each other, Dave said we don't need each other, ha ha ha, you are proving the point. The speech is so much more than just oh, well, I guess the answer is an abstract, we need each other. Next! Go and watch it. Watch it a few times. It took me quite a while to fully understand it. James Baldwin has this very sort of Shakespearean way of speaking, and can be a little bit, difficult to understand at first, but when you get it, it is poetry in motion. Is this a debate? Well, it might well be a debate. Oddly, though, hardly anyone seems to care who Baldwin's opponent is in this debate. They barely even remember him. They barely even listen to his side of it. Okay, it's mostly just James Baldwin. If anything, it's very much a speech made 50 years ago prior to, as I said, this modern obsession with internet debate culture. But heavens no, of course it's a debate. These two things are ontologically the exact same thing as each other. Ha ha, owned. Next. When someone's trying to make a point, right, stop immediately scanning around for some cherry-picked gotcha all of the time. Because when you do that, the meat of your analysis is really no better than a Thunderfoot video.
Most recently, Double Dragon Neon in 2012 reintroduced new gamers to this regressive crap yet again, this time in full HD.
Without mentioning that the game Double Dragon Neon ends like this.
One day to antagonize you, Billy and Jimmy!
Oh, right in the balls.
The pattern of presenting women as fundamentally weak, ineffective, or ultimately incapable.
Feminism debunked, people. Now, finally, I got a lot of these comments. VDS, which if you don't know stands for Vaush Derangement Syndrome. Basically what people say to folks who have a dislike of Vaush, petty or steal. Now, look, if you were to say that you found someone who is apparently always correct, who's basically infallible, whose detractors are always uncharitable, I would say you were lying. You'd expect someone to make errors, okay, to be wrong sometimes. But in the Vaushverse, everything is forgivable, except the people he's talking to. They're always wrong. If you are accusing all those who dislike Vaush many times very validly, and just throw them into this pathology, that you can just write them off, then you are literally engaging in cult behaviour. I'm not going to lie. And frankly, you could easily argue that the responses that I've seen to all this discussion, you could consider this minoritized derangement syndrome, because it's literally the same sanctimonious pearl-clutching at any possible criticism that you claim. If you throw the ball at me, or Lua, or JohnTheDuncan, with genocide supporter, or defender of the Nation of Islam, you are literally just engaging in that bile for which you criticize others of doing to you and your sacred cows. Now, for all those not-so-great comments that I got, I did get this comment by Jack Neeson, and this is an essay by Lorenzo Ervin called The Progressive Plantation. He's an ex-Panther, by the way, and I must say, when I was reading this, I wish I'd been shown this before, because it is damning. It is damning. I honestly think that every white socialist needs to read this. I cannot recommend this enough. Literally everything I've been thinking about, I've been talking about Ian, it's here. If you've any misunderstandings, if you still don't get the point at hand after going over this, if you still deny it, if you still think it's bad optics, I don't know what to say, but honestly, give it a read. The Progressive Plantation by Lorenzo Kom'boa Ervin. That's all for now, folks. I don't really want to take any more time or space up on this topic. See ya.